I am vengeance. I am the night. I am a little bit mixed on the stuff that came out of DC Fandome, to be honest. Hey everybody, so extra video this week because DC Fandome. Now I did do a video on DC tail end of last week because before talking about anything that went on the event, I did feel the need to bring attention to the massive firings of pretty much the entire editorial staff and the cancellation of a whole bunch of books over at DC Comics itself, especially because it felt like Warner Brothers was really hoping that would be completely drowned out by stuff coming out of DC Fandome, and indeed it did. But I got that off my chest. I have reminded you now so that I can sleep at night and feel okay. So let's talk about what they actually did drop at this thing. Now, this is not going to be a comprehensive list of everything that was talked about, but I am going to go over the major stuff, i.e., trailers. I'll touch on some of the other things as I remember them. So if I don't bring something up, it's because it didn't stick in my head. I'm human and lazy. So let's start with the big one, which would be the trailer for Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now, before I talk about the trailer, they did also confirm that this is going to be released as a 4-part miniseries, an hour apiece, so a total of 4 hours for this thing. Which, first off, can I just say that the fact that this is being touted as the Snyder Cut is feeling a little bit dubious, and I'll explain why. 4 hours is about the length that you'd expect out of a first pass cut. Even if he had stayed on the project, they never would have allowed him to produce a 4-hour long film. So what we're going to get isn't actually the movie we would have gotten in theaters had Zack Snyder been allowed to finish it. We're basically getting the extra expanded edition, I suppose is the best way to put it. But it is odd to me that they're not holding it to a theatrical standard like they would have actually done if he had stayed on the film originally. But then again, I guess they granted him the ultimate cut on Batman v Superman, so I suppose there's precedent. Anyways, let me be upfront about the fact that I am not the target audience for this thing. I'm not in or down for Snyder's take on these characters for the most part. I'm just not. I don't think Snyder is a bad director. I don't think he was even necessarily a bad choice, but his version of what this universe and these characters are is not something I really wanted. So I will actually say that for the most part, this sells what it is pretty well. What it's selling is not something I am personally all that interested in buying. I'll probably still see it out of morbid curiosity, but it does a pretty solid job. It communicates the mood that I would expect out of the finished product, and a mood that is distinct from the film that we got in theaters. There's a lot of footage that was not in the theatrical cut, so they're really showing off some of the extra stuff there, including, stuff that was in early trailers that was clearly cut from Joss Whedon's version of the film, in addition to some stuff that clearly a lot of CGI work has already been done on, with shots of things like Darkseid and the, original conception of Steppenwolf. That being said, I did roll my eyes and go, oh, are you freaking kidding me? Over the music selection. Snyder should know better than to use that song, because the last time he dabbled with that song in his Watchmen film, that was the one moment where even people I know who really liked that movie still mock that moment where it was used there. It's a very on-the-nose selection. It's not, for what the song's actually about, it was actually appropriate for its use in Watchmen, even though that was, it feels very inappropriate here in terms of what the song is standardly supposed to be about, and it feels very especially considering his Hallelujah possibly even literally feels like preaching to the choir. Your savior, Zack Snyder, has come. it just feels so self-indulgent. And I normally wouldn't hammer on this too hard, except Snyder himself he's really gone all in on this stuff. And like somebody brought my attention to a reply he did to something on Twitter, and I'll put his tweet up here, but he basically went, "If you don't like what I'm doing, it's because you're a child." Like, really? Dude? Honestly, it's become one of those things that even if the Snyder Cut is good, I feel like it's something that's going to be soured for me by the fandom well before that. Kind of the way that over time I kind of soured on Firefly from some of the fandom on that. Star Wars fandom has definitely soured me on some stuff and I don't like that. Especially in the case of this, where, like, at least with Firefly and Star Wars, that was a fandom I was actively in. And that kind of went in a direction I was like, but, like, something like this, fandom that I have no part of is still turning me off this. And it feels like he's just really feeding into that, the Snyder Cut people. And, like, that makes sense to a degree. It's arguable that they and their online campaign and support was the reason this happened. So I get it, but it feels less like, thank you so much for helping me get this done. It feels much more like, yes, I am great and mighty and my faithful shall be rewarded. It feels high on himself right now with this. And that's turning me off a little bit. Kind of a little bit how Todd Phillips talking about the Joker movie. I had issues with that film regardless, but that kind of soured me a bit with him talking about how it's a real movie and this. I'm like, oh, for God's sake. Anyways, like I said, it's a pretty competently and decently put together trailer. It feels like it's probably going to be accurate to what the thing is. So, my issues aside, it's a pretty good trailer. And if you are one of the people who is actively looking forward to the Snyder Cut, it probably really landed for you. So, I can't really critique it other than the music choice and sort of critiquing the vibe around it. But, I am going to try and eventually assess the movie separate from all that. We'll see if I'm capable. I am only human. What else we got? Okay, so the Wonder Woman trailer. It looked good and fun and it was consistent with the first one, but then they gave us a look at Cheetah. And I will be honest, Cheetah was the one thing that I've been most skeptical about going into this for two reasons. One is she's the kind of villain that I'm not sure is going to work in the types of stories that they usually do in superhero movies. She's a very one-on-one kind of villain, which doesn't lend itself to the larger epic scale and scope that they usually like to have for superhero stories in movies. That's not to say that she can't be made to work. I was also somewhat skeptical of the casting. I am not a particularly big fan of Kristen Wiig. And that having been said, the bits of her that we saw in this trailer when she is still human, I feel like I'm gelling with what she's doing. And I think she might even be able to do it well. Then we got the images of Cheetah, as Cheetah. And first off, it really felt like they were simultaneously trying to show off what this looked like, but also hide it because it's really dark and it's hard to make out clearly. But man, did it make me think of Cats. And part of that's not this thing's fault. It didn't, when they were shooting this, they didn't know Cats was going to be Cats, but I'm not feeling this all CGI fur thing. I'm just not. I wish they'd come up with a practical suit or something, modified with CGI, but it looks mocap. It doesn't look great. So that has me a little, But I hope it doesn't drag the movie down. And to be fair, if that is something that doesn't happen until the climax of the first film, first Wonder Woman, was the weakest part of that movie. So I guess that'll just be the consistent problem with Wonder Woman movies. They dropped stuff about a couple of video games. There was Gotham Knights, which my interest is purely academic, kind of in terms of I wonder, what the story will be, because I don't have a current gen gaming system. God, we're heading into another new generation. I'm definitely not going to be down on the ground floor of that. So my interest in that stuff is fairly minimal, but it was kind of nice that they showed it off a bit. There was the Suicide Squad roll call sort of trailer thing where we got the full list of all the characters and actors who are in this. And we also found out who the villain's going to be. And my God, James Gunn, you wonderful madman. So first of all, this cast is huge, which to me says two things. One, we're going to have a lot more of them die on mission, which they should. The fact that only one character tokenly died in the first one, and it was super obvious if you were paying attention at all who it was going to be. It was like, what the hell ever. Whereas here, I'm hoping that they will, it will be much harder to predict who's going to die and who's going to live. And with a cast this big, they can pick off a lot more of them. And the other thing that they're really leaning into is the idea that the Suicide Squad is usually made up of C and D listers. So we've got people like The Thinker, Peter Capaldi, Natch, and the Weasel and Ratcatcher 2 and Polka Dot Man, and Nathan Fillion is playing Arm Fall Off Boy. Oh, that makes me so happy. And then in addition, we found out who the villain's going to be. The villain is going to be Starro, the Conqueror. Now, if you don't know your comic book lore, Starro is a character with actually a little bit of prestige to him. He was the first villain that the Justice League as a team ever fought. He's also a psychic starfish from space. And if it was anyone other than James Gunn directing this thing, I would immediately be going, But, he made Ego the Living Planet work. So, hey, why not? I will still say it gives me a little bit of concern because Starro the Conqueror is a large global style threat. And that was one of the big fundamental issues with the first Suicide Squad is you don't call the Suicide Squad to deal with a threat to the planet. You assemble the Suicide Squad for something that is dangerous but doesn't warrant legitimate superheroes. And if we're dealing with Starro, unless they really change his MO, then I don't feel like the Suicide it's too grand a threat. It's too large scale a mission for the Suicide Squad. Although I suppose it's possible that they'll initially get dispatched on something smaller and it'll snowball into dealing with him. Maybe. I don't know. But I have a lot of faith in James Gunn taking this on. So that helps. And then we've got a few things that we learned about. Don't worry, I'm getting to the Batman trailer. We'll save that for the end. Aquaman 2, they're still working on. Shazam 2, they're still working on. There was sort of an animatic kind of thing released for Black Adam as a tease. It was kind of nice just to get it confirmed that Black Adam's still a thing that they are aware they said they were going to do. A bit like the Flash movie, it is one of those things I'll believe it when I see on-set photos of them actually filming it. Until then, I'm kind of a little skeptical that it's ever going to actually happen just because they've been talking about it for so long with no real forward movement. But they did present something, which is more than they've done up to this point. Because up to this point, they've just sort of said, yeah, The Rock will be Black Adam. Anything else? No, that's it. We got a little bit more of a sense of feel and tone from this. That was it. And it's an animatic, so it's not something that they're necessarily committed to in terms of doing it that way. But, it's something. That was kind of neat. Let's talk about the Batman trailer, which was the other one in addition to Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is kind of the big thing. There are some things that I'm intrigued by. There are some things that I'm on board for. There are some things that I'm like, I don't know. So let's start with Robert Pattinson as Batman. First off, I kind of get a kick out of the fact that they're acknowledging he's got a bunch of really dark makeup around his eyes, to darken his eyes under the mask. because it always did throw me off in things like the original Batman. You can clearly see on any close-up that this has all been blacked all around here, but it takes the cowl and the mask off, and I'm like, no, it's not there. So I kind of like that they just acknowledge that he's just got this smeary black eyeshadow all around. So there's that. I don't love the loose floppy hair. I don't know why. I always think of Bruce Wayne with a bit more of a tamed haircut, I guess. That's an aesthetic thing. That doesn't really matter. I did like the first image we got of him just kind of standing here and him moving. He has this intimidating stance, just way of holding himself when he's in the suit that I saw that. I'm digging that. I'm feeling that. So I'm really mixed on the bit where he beats up somebody. On the one hand, I like that it's a continuous cut and it is a hard-hitting bit of action. Like, those hits hurt, and that's generally what I ask for in any action scene. The hits should hurt. The problem is, even though it's well executed and well done and it works, my problem is I'm kind of sick of brutal Batman. I'm kind of over it. You know, Bale was on the edge of that, and then the Affleck Batman really leaned into that. And it's a little bit disappointing, especially seeing that in a first trailer, knowing that the Riddler appears to be the main villain here, and the Riddler is someone to tax his abilities as a detective, as opposed to someone who just beats people up. Not that I don't like a good Batman action scene, but I feel like we haven't really properly had him being a detective on screen. I was kind of looking forward to this doing that. And so it makes me nervous that the most focused bit on Batman we get is this. Now, to be fair, they had only shot about 25% of this movie before they had to shut down production because the plague hit. So it's distinctly possible that this scene is not necessarily representative of most of what Batman is going to be doing. It just happens to be something that they had already shot, so they kind of had to stick it in because they've only got so much footage to work with. That's a distinct possibility. And so that's sort of my asterisk on this criticism, that, you know, they may not have the more detective-y stuff to be able to put in a trailer yet. Jeffrey Wright as Gordon, I'm down for that. I am very curious to find out more about this Riddler, about Paul Dano's Riddler. They seem to be going for kind of almost a John Doe from Seven, or Jigsaw Killer kind of thing with him, which, part of me says that's just grittying up the Riddler in a way that is the most obvious way to do it, except that, you know, the only Riddler we've had on the big screen so far was Jim Carrey's campy Riddler, which I actually like. I actually think he was good for that part. But you know what? Let's have a serious take on the Riddler. I'm okay with that. Especially because I feel like we kind of got my ideal balance of the Riddler from Gotham in terms of balancing the a homicidal nature with the need to riddle people. And so since I already feel like I have that, I'm a little bit more willing to be like, okay, you want to go a little bit further on this end, on the dark and the deranged end for this one? Okay, I've got my balanced version of the Riddler fairly recently. Let's see what you do on this far end. I'll take a look. So that's just kind of where I am. Obviously, the film's very dark visually. Huge shock. Batman is dark. Ooh, edgy. We hear a little bit of Andy Serkis as Alfred, which I'm down for. I dig that. Again, to compare to Gotham, his voice has that same sort of slightly dirtier vibe that Sean Pertwee brought. So I don't mean to overly compare it to Gotham, but it does kind of feel like it's taking a few cues from that in a way that I like, especially as a fan of Gotham. So, yeah, this trailer was pretty successful, especially knowing how little of the film is actually shot and how little footage they would have had to work with to put this together in the first place. I am intrigued to see what else we get. That's kind of it for me on this. It was a decently put together presentation, all things considered. There was, I think the Suicide Squad trailer was the thing I was the most overwhelmingly positive towards. Everything else, I had a note here or there about, but this was pretty well put together. And, yeah, props to them on presenting it well and having some decent stuff to show off. We'll see how much of it pans out, how much of it ends up being as good as they're making it look now. But what are your thoughts on the various things from DC Fandome, the trailers, the announcements, anything I failed to talk about? Because obviously there was plenty of other stuff that went on that I either touched on very lightly or didn't touch on at all. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something on down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Bunch of stuff to do. You know what it is. Like, share, subscribe, and all those things. And I have links to merch, other social media, etc., etc. I have a Patreon, which is what enables me to keep the lights on around here. But you also don't have to do any of it. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.